A tremendous amount of moisture, clouds, and rain moving into the eastern U.S. But first, let's take a look around the world. The world's hotspot in central Australia, 119 degrees in Untitled, which is not a mining town, but it's an old trading route community. Unfortunately, it has been bypassed by the main north-south highway, but in the 1880s it was a stopping point for camel trains before the Great Northern Railway was laid down in the 1880s. And there's a few scenes around Untitled. The world's cold spot? Yeah, take a guess. Dalyankir, out there on that lonely bridge across the Dalyankir River. And there's the scene of all that mud and gravel. Probably a very lonely place right now. All right, focusing on the weather in our area, there's the midday conditions, a stagnant frontal system from the Ohio River Valley into southeastern Texas, and with that, considerable rain. We're in our third day of significant rain here in Texas. I think my backyard weather station has gotten around 6 or 7 inches. There's the radar imagery going back to yesterday morning. Lots of convective activity, lots of training of cells along this northeast-southwest axis. And you can see it spreading into Louisiana there overnight, but additional bands develop out to the west. And the end result is just a bunch of rain. There's the best estimate of 7-day totals through this morning, and a band of 6 to 8 inches from east of San Antonio up to the Arklatex region. And these problems will continue spreading eastward over the next couple days. There's the precipitable water for midday today, and we've got 1.5 inch of precipitable water all the way from southeast Texas up to Nashville, and a band of 1-inch amounts all the way into the Great Lakes region. Now that is common in summer, but in the middle of winter, that is quite rare. And for those of you who are new to forecasting precipitable water, that's just a measure of how much water vapor there is in the air from the ground all the way up to the stratosphere. So if you squeezed all that water out of the column, you would get that much in your rain gauge. So what we see here, this dark red color, that is outside the 30-year climatology. So this is definitely a very rare event. And this is a 3-week sample of climatology, which makes this even more significant. So if we bring that into tonight and into tomorrow, you can see we get into some serious high precipitable water across the central Appalachians, and that continues spreading eastward into Virginia and Maryland and New Jersey tomorrow night into Friday. Then it looks like on Friday we're finally done with some of this record precipitable water, but still hanging on to some significant amounts in the Carolinas and Georgia. We can also measure that in terms of percentiles. So starting out for midday today, we've got this blue from Kentucky down to Louisiana. Blue indicates that's a maximum observed value for this time of the day. Then as we go into tonight and into tomorrow, we bring out the highest values, light blue, which is the maximum observed in all of the hours of the day. Finally, by Friday, it clears out, but still some very high values in the Carolinas and Georgia. That dark green is still up there in the 99th percentile, so still the potential for some flooding rains in the southeast. And it looks like by Sunday, things are starting to dry out. Where is all this moisture and warmth coming from? Well, we go up to 500 millibars in the middle of the troposphere, and we see a very strong subtropical high across the Bahamas down towards Dominica. 594 decameters. That's getting close to what we see in the summertime. And meanwhile, we've got this troughing across Mexico and the central U.S. So we've got basically a pressure gradient between the southwestern Atlantic and the central North American continent. And the result, southwesterly or southerly flow across the Gulf of Mexico. And that brings the moisture and warmth northward. Elsewhere around the continent, we've got a split flow pattern, the jet running something like this down into Mexico, up from Texas into the northeastern U.S., and the northern stream. There it is near the top of the chart. You can see the Hudson Bay vortex has broken down and ejected to the east, and we're left with a series of troughs. This is also coincident with an increase in the Arctic oscillation, or the annular mode. Basically, we're getting into positive AO as far as the index. That means an increase in the zonal flow, especially in the northern latitudes, and that tends to keep the Arctic air at bay. So what we've got here in the U.S., we look westward, upstream, along the southern stream, and we've got this series of medium-scale troughs from the central U.S. into the eastern Pacific. And that will affect our weather over the next week. And I figure I would introduce you to the orange monster. That's those orange temperatures that we see on the charts in northern Canada. If we go back to February of 2021, before that record-breaking event, we had a lot of those oranges, and that represents minus 20, minus 30, minus 40. That's getting into some of the worst polar air. And you can kind of see what happened back there in 2021. Significant amounts of Arctic air generated in western Canada, and eventually some of that made its way down into the central U.S. Well, for today, we've definitely got that in the eastern Arctic region from Baffin Island up to Ellesmere Island, and some of the Inuit communities right in here, they've got extreme cold warnings in effect. However, with that very strong zonal component across much of Canada, we're not going to see any of that Arctic air coming south. And the trend over the next week, well, we're definitely building a lot of cold air, but just not a favorable pattern to bring that south. You can see Quebec does get some of that by Monday, so there will be some significant impacts from Quebec down to Newfoundland. But through the remainder of the week next week, just glancing blows in the northeastern U.S. with very little impact in the central and western states. There's a look at some of that cold on the surface plots down to minus 33 at Hall Beach, and as we go north, minus 25 to minus 30, and as cold as minus 47 at Eureka. And some problems with cold weather in parts of Alaska and Yukon, down to minus 46 at Fort Yukon and minus 44 at Old Crow. Environment Canada has posted extreme cold warnings from Burwash up to Dawson and Old Crow. No advisories in Alaska, but it is certainly quite cold. Returning into the lower 48 and taking a look at the northeastern U.S., we only have one major advisory. One is from New York into parts of Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. That goes through tomorrow morning. Looking for mixed precip throughout that area, with some of it freezing rain in Vermont and the Albany area. Dense fog advisories in Long Island Sound through tonight, and Buffalo looking at flood watches with these bands of rain starting to move in on top of snowmelt and swollen rivers. Excessive rainfall also a problem in southeastern Ohio, especially around Huntington and Parkersburg. And of course, in the short term, we will have those high precipitable waters moving into West Virginia and Virginia, so the rain will be on the increase. In the southeastern U.S., extensive rainfall. The Weather Prediction Center going for a rare moderate risk of excessive rainfall across parts of Louisiana and Mississippi. For tomorrow, slight risk all the way up to Atlanta, and the day 3 for Friday, continuing that slight risk on the central Gulf Coast. Then gradually things start to taper down going into the weekend. But for now, those extreme precipitable waters supporting extensive generation of precipitation from Mississippi down into the Texas Gulf Coast region. Fortunately, not much instability, so the severe risks will be minimal. So this is kind of a recap where we are on those boundaries. One segment of that front, arcing back towards Longview and Shreveport, we can take a closer look at this area. This was a quick analysis I did around 15Z, around mid-morning. You can see that front just north of Shreveport, coming around back towards Jacksonville, Texas, and down to the College Station area. Ahead of that front, temperatures in the low 60s, very high dew points. On the other side around Dallas, Waco, temperatures in the 40s with a northwesterly wind. The water vapor imagery showing that massive plume of moisture coming up from Mexico, being driven by that subtropical high and the troughing across the mountainous regions of North America. So again, that is supporting that large area of convection, which will be moving northeast over the next 24 hours. There's how it looks in the north-central U.S., extensive fog. We've seen dense fog advisories this morning in most of Missouri up into western Illinois. Into Illinois itself, Kankakee, which is south of Chicago, has been put under a flood watch through Monday due to rain, snowmelt, and heavy river ice. Some of that rain will be coming in tomorrow, and the snowmelt itself contributing to about 2 inches of equivalent rain. Heading up into the Great Plains, some fog as well in South Dakota. They've had dense fog advisories from Pierre northward to the reservations. Looking good in the southwestern U.S., but the next wave moving through California, kind of a dry system, but we are expecting snows in the mountains of Utah for tonight into Thursday. The California beaches are looking much better, but high surf advisories continue around Oxnard, Lompoc, and San Luis Obispo. In the short term, we will see a ridge start to build over the area Thursday and Friday, but the tail end of a front may graze northwestern California. Meanwhile, this next wave will be moving towards Texas, and that will produce another round of precipitation into late week. In the Pacific Northwest, a respite as this dry slot works into Seattle and Portland. However, the back edge of this wave affecting the Cascades, and they do have a winter weather advisory through Thursday. 6 to 11 inches of snow expected, and that includes Stevens Pass. Here's what we're looking at over the next week to 2 weeks at the jet stream level. You can see that the flow is somewhat northwesterly coming into California, and there's even some ridging to the west. But as we go into next week, we can see a vast increase in the zonal component, a 175-knot jet lurking offshore, and you can see as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday next week, that's going to take aim on California, and we get more of a southerly component, which tends to be wetter, and that can interact with the subtropical jet as well, and really pump up that precipitable water. So the last frame I have in this sequence looks like this. Troughing in California and a long, active polar front jet. And this time of year, that can definitely spell potential for major atmospheric river events. So let's make a quick stop with the Q vectors. This is in the mid-levels of the atmosphere, about 500 millibars. And you're looking at the 500 millibar heights and the Q vector field between 400 and 700 millibars. So this is pretty popular with some of our viewers because you can't really find these charts online. And for the rest of you, you can look at the troughing and heights, and that shows you where there's significant weather going on. The large ridge right there on the East Coast, that's associated with an influx of warm air. You may not feel it at the surface, but it could be aloft, helping to support the warm conveyor belts, and that's certainly what's going on right there. Let's go ahead and run this through tonight, and we see a couple waves moving through Texas, the next one on its way in from the west. And then going into the overnight hours, large trough moving into Arkansas, Missouri. That's going to support this area of lift in the mid-Mississippi River Valley during the day tomorrow. And here comes the next wave, digging into the backside of this larger scale trough through the Four Corners tomorrow evening, then into Texas for Friday. Now the moisture will be depleted somewhat. Most of the stronger lift will be in the left front quadrant of the jet. The jet itself, I'll draw that out for you. That's going to run about like this. The jet max appears to be right in this area, so that's going to be the left front quadrant. Okay, So going into the remainder of Friday and Saturday, that lift moves into the Ohio River Valley for Saturday and supports another round of rain. And let's go into the remainder of the weekend. Northwesterly flow, couple waves coming down the backside, lots of ridging out in California. So we'll see those temperatures come up quite a bit. And there's the charts going into midweek, ridging in the Rockies, troughing on the East Coast. And that's going to be the last chart we have for February 3rd. So things getting quite active on the West Coast. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the forecast, starting out with midday today. We do have some cold air damming in the Piedmont region. That's where we have cold air trapped against the mountains as that southerly flow builds in. And let's go into tonight. The precip moves into the Appalachians and down into the south-central U.S. Another wave moving through Texas, so the precip starts once again in East Texas. But finally, some drawing in back behind it. Then going into the day on Thursday, this wave moves into Missouri, and that makes its way up into the Midwest. Meanwhile, the next system moving across the Rockies, we saw that upper-level wave on the previous charts. That's producing some snows in the mountains. And then finally, it interacts with some of that moisture in Texas, and we get rain starting up from Abilene to Dodge City. And another system coming together, most of the heavier rain focused on Oklahoma City, up to Woodward, and a little bit down there on the Texas Gulf Coast around Houston near the Triple Point. And I am missing a few charts, so we're going to go forward in 24-hour jumps. This is going to be early Sunday, major weather system in the East Coast, some bands of snow from Detroit down to South Bend. Then jumping ahead to Monday morning, the tail end of the front developing a wave off of the Delmarva, most of the country looking clear. Then going up to Tuesday, a dry northwest flow system, a little bit Alberta Clipper coming south, and yet another Alberta Clipper up to the north on Wednesday that dives into the Midwest for Thursday, and then we go into Friday. That's going to be that big Pacific system coming together, and there could be some interaction with a atmospheric river as that takes shape. And I thought I'd share with you something kind of interesting. How many of you remember the storm of the century from 1993? Well, you're looking at it. There it is. Well, it's coming together south of Texas. This is a developing baroclinic zone. And as we go into the following days, you can see it come together out there in the Gulf of Mexico. Develops a squall line, which you can't really see on here. But gradually, the surface cyclone comes together on the 12th. And by the 13th, the weather system is moving up the East Coast. You can see those strong winds, 30 to 40 knots offshore, off of the Carolinas, and a vast plume of snow from Maine down through the Appalachians. And you can see a 968 millibar low across the Delmarva on Saturday evening as that moves to the north. So that is the great system. Hope you found that interesting, and I'll be showing you some more interesting case studies in the weeks ahead. And that will be all for this edition of Forecast Lab. Remember to leave comments about anything that you liked or anything that you want to see. And if you want to see more of something, also post as well. I do care a lot about what you want to see. It can be a little bit hard to make major changes to the program, but I will keep trying to show stuff that you all want to look at, so definitely post and let me know what you liked. No new Patreon supporters since the 8th. Well, that's too bad, but we'll continue to keep these programs coming. So, yeah, please keep in mind if you want to help support the program, please head over to Patreon. And we'll see you back here for another edition on Friday. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.